This is BattleTech Declassified. Modern Warfare Explained. The United States will spend $620,000 to train one person for a job that most of them will never get. Not $60,000, not $120,000. $620,000 spent on a single candidate before that candidate has ever fired a shot in anger or completed a single real mission. And here is the part that should stop you. Roughly 80% of the people this money is spent on will fail. They will not finish. The Navy knows this going in. It happens anyway, year after year, budget after budget, and nobody in the Pentagon considers it a scandal. They consider it the plan. This is the economics of the Navy SEAL, and it is stranger than almost anyone realizes. Somewhere in Washington right now, a defense contractor is trying to sell the Pentagon a stealth drone for $600,000, and there is a committee arguing over every line of that budget. Meanwhile, the Navy spends the same amount of money on a human being, accepts an 80% failure rate without blinking, and calls it one of the best investments the military makes. Today, we are going to find out why that math actually makes sense, where every one of those dollars goes, and what it says about how America has decided to fight its next war. To understand this, you have to start with what the money is actually buying. It is not fitness. Plenty of people can run fast and swim well. Every year, thousands of college athletes, triathletes, and competitive swimmers show up to SEAL selection in the best physical shape of their lives, and most of them are gone within weeks. What the Navy is buying with that $620,000 is closer to insurance. It is buying the elimination of every single person who cannot function without sleep, cannot make decisions while freezing, and cannot keep operating after watching a stronger, faster teammate quit right in front of them. The training is not designed to build those qualities. It is designed to reveal who already has them, and that revealing process is brutally expensive. There is a bell that hangs in the compound at Coronado, California, where SEAL selection takes place. Any candidate, at any moment, day or night, can walk up to that bell and ring it 3 times. That is the entire resignation process. No paperwork, no exit interview, no explanation required. Ring the bell, and it is over. The bell matters because it makes quitting effortless while making staying agonizing, and that is deliberate. The Navy does not want people who stayed because leaving was complicated. It wants people who had the easiest possible exit available every single hour of every single day and never took it. Over the next few minutes, we will break down exactly where that $620,000 goes, from instructor salaries to underwater training pools to the medical staff standing by around the clock during Hell Week. Then we will look at the real math behind an 80% dropout rate, because that number sounds like waste until you understand what the Navy is actually optimizing for. And finally, we will connect this to the wider picture, because the United States is not the only country pouring money into elite operators. And how much a nation is willing to spend on failure says a lot about how seriously it takes the next fight. Start with the pipeline itself. Becoming a Navy SEAL is not a single course. It is roughly 2 years of continuous training. It begins with preparatory conditioning, then moves into basic underwater demolition and SEAL training, known as BUD-S, which alone runs about 7 months, and is where the overwhelming majority of the attrition happens. BUD-S is divided into 3 phases. First phase is physical conditioning, and it ends with Hell Week, which we will get to shortly. Second phase is combat diving, where candidates learn to operate underwater for hours at a time, including exercises where instructors deliberately tear off their breathing equipment, tie their hoses in knots, and watch how each man responds to the sensation of drowning while being required to follow procedure calmly instead of panicking. Third phase is land warfare, weapons, demolitions, and small unit tactics, conducted partly on San Clemente Island, where there is nowhere to quit to. The filter itself is older than most people think. The direct ancestor of BUD-S was created during the Second World War, when the Navy needed swimmers to clear beach obstacles ahead of amphibious landings, and discovered, under real fire, that physical talent predicted almost nothing about who kept working when things went wrong. The infamous week of deliberate, sleepless overload was built into the training from the very beginning, and it has survived every modernization since. through Korea, Vietnam, and 2 decades of counterterrorism operations, essentially unchanged. 80 years of warfare have transformed every weapon the Navy uses. The filter for the men has barely moved, because the thing it measures has not changed either. After BUD, comes SEAL qualification training, another 6 months, followed by specialized instruction in military freefall parachuting, advanced combat diving, sniper work, communications, and combat medicine. Every phase of that pipeline needs instructors, and not just any instructors. These are experienced combat veterans pulled off operational deployment to teach, which means the Navy is paying the salary of a proven operator while simultaneously paying to train his eventual replacement. That dual cost is the first reason the number gets so large so fast. An instructor cadre for a single BUD-S class can involve dozens of senior operators, each one representing years of prior investment, all dedicated to evaluating a group of candidates, most of whom will not be there in 2 months. Then add the infrastructure. Underwater training pools built for combat diver certification, obstacle courses engineered to survive constant abuse from thousands of candidates a year, dive lockers full of equipment that has to be maintained to a standard where a single malfunction could kill someone 50 feet underwater, and parachute facilities held to the same unforgiving standard. None of this is generic military equipment shared across every base. It exists because this training exists, and it has to be staffed, inspected, and maintained whether 10 candidates show up that cycle or 200. The other major cost sits somewhere people rarely look: medical support. Hell Week is the most famous filter in the entire American military for a reason. It runs roughly 5.5 days of continuous operation, during which candidates get somewhere around 4 hours of total sleep, not per night, total, across the entire week. They run, paddle, carry boats and logs, and swim through cold Pacific surf while instructors with megaphones remind them, hour after hour, that the bell is right there. The physical toll is not theoretical. Candidates develop stress fractures, hypothermia, cellulitis, and in some cases, a condition where fluid accumulates in the lungs from prolonged cold water exposure. None of that can wait for a trip to a civilian hospital. There is a dedicated medical team on site, around the clock, monitoring core temperatures, screening for the injuries candidates try to hide, and making the call on who is medically done regardless of how badly the man wants to continue. Injuring or losing a healthy young service member during training is both a legal catastrophe and a public relations disaster the Navy spends enormous money to prevent. Add the specialty pay that starts accumulating even before a candidate earns the Trident, the insignia that marks a qualified SEAL, dive pay, jump pay, hazardous duty pay. Individually, these are small monthly amounts, but multiplied across a 2-year pipeline and class after class where most people will not finish, it becomes a real line item. By the time you total the instructors, the facilities, the medical coverage, and the pay owed to everyone in the pipeline, graduate and drop out alike, the $620,000 figure stops sounding like an exaggeration. If anything, it starts sounding conservative. If the economics of modern warfare are your kind of rabbit hole, subscribe now. Every Wednesday we cover a new system, and every Saturday we go deeper. Here is where the numbers stop looking wasteful and start looking deliberate. An 80% failure rate sounds like the Navy failing at its own selection process. It is the opposite. The Navy already knows, going into every class, that most of these young men will not make it, and it has built the entire cost structure around that fact rather than trying to prevent it. Every candidate who rings the bell still consumed instructor hours, medical support, food, equipment, and facility time, and none of that spending produced an operational SEAL. That sunk cost gets absorbed into the price of the 20% who finish, which is exactly why the attrition-adjusted cost per graduate climbs so high. You are not paying for one man's training. You are paying for the training of the 4 or 5 men who did not make it alongside him. This is where most cost critiques of the program miss the point entirely. Reducing attrition would make the program dramatically cheaper per graduate. Softer standards, more recovery time, better weather windows, all of it would push more candidates through and spread the fixed costs across a bigger graduating class. The Navy refuses because the entire purpose of BUD-S is not to train SEALs. It is to filter for a specific psychological profile that cannot be taught in 6 months and cannot be detected by any written test, interview, or physical exam anyone has ever designed. Sleep deprivation, cold water, and constant failure are not obstacles the Navy is trying to help candidates overcome. They are the measurement instrument itself. The strange proof of this is that the Navy has actually tried to lower attrition before, and the attempts kept teaching the same lesson. Over the years, the program has experimented with better candidate screening, psychological profiling, mentorship programs, and preparatory courses designed to predict and improve who makes it through. Some of it helped at the margins. None of it changed the fundamental reality that the only reliable way to find out whether a man keeps functioning at hour 90 of Hell Week is to run him to hour 90 of Hell Week. There is no shortcut, no simulation, and no questionnaire that produces that information. The test is expensive precisely because the information it produces cannot be obtained any other way. Compare that to almost any other high-cost military investment. Fighter pilots go through an expensive, multi-year pipeline too, and a trained aviator represents millions of dollars of accumulated investment. But the washout rate in pilot training is nowhere near 80% because the Air Force is selecting for measurable, teachable skills, flight performance, situational awareness, procedural discipline, things that can be graded, refined, and improved with repetition. SEAL selection is measuring something different. What happens to a man's decision-making when every physical and psychological support has been stripped away? One of these things can be taught. The other can only be discovered. So when critics call the SEAL pipeline wasteful because of the dropout rate, they are applying the wrong metric. The genuinely wasteful version of this program would be the one with a 10% failure rate because it would mean the filter had stopped filtering and the cost of that failure would not show up in a budget document. It would show up years later, on a mission, in the dark, when someone who should never have passed selection makes a decision that gets a team killed. An 80% failure rate is not a flaw in the system. It is the entire point of the system. And the $620,000 price tag is simply what that level of certainty costs. The United States is not the only country that has figured this out. China has spent the last decade rapidly expanding its own special operations forces, modeling elements of its selection process on exactly the kind of extreme attrition training the U.S. pioneered decades ago. Russia has done something similar with its Spetsnaz units. Even smaller NATO members have begun investing disproportionately in elite, low headcount units rather than expanding conventional forces because the math of modern conflict keeps pushing in the same direction. As precision weapons and persistent surveillance make large troop movements easier to detect and target, small teams capable of operating independently, sometimes deep inside contested territory with no support for days at a time, become disproportionately valuable. You cannot buy that capability off the shelf. You can only build it slowly, expensively, and with a failure rate most organizations would never tolerate. That is what makes this a genuinely competitive space rather than a historical curiosity. Every dollar a rival nation spends trying to replicate this kind of selection process is effectively an admission that the model works. And every rival that fails to replicate it, that softens the standards to hit graduation quotas or shortens the pipeline to save money, is functionally conceding a category of warfare where small, elite teams increasingly decide outcomes that used to require entire divisions. There is one more layer to the economics that rarely gets discussed, and that is what happens after the Trident. The $620,000 gets a man through the pipeline, but the investment does not stop there. It compounds. Every deployment, every specialized school, every year of operational experience makes that operator more valuable and more expensive to replace. This is why the Navy pays significant retention bonuses to keep experienced SEALs from leaving for private sector security work, and why losing a 15-year operator to retirement represents a capability gap that no amount of money can fill quickly. The pipeline produces the raw material. The decade afterward produces the actual weapon. This is also why the $620,000 figure sounds completely different once you place it next to the alternatives. A single cruise missile costs well over $1 million and gets used exactly once. A finished Navy SEAL can be deployed, redeployed, and retasked for a decade or more. adapting to entirely new mission types the Navy has not even designed yet. Hostage rescue this year, underwater reconnaissance, the next training partner forces the year after that. No piece of hardware in the American arsenal has that kind of flexibility. Considered that way, the 80% washout rate is not the expensive part of this system. It is the cost of guaranteeing that the 20% who remain can be trusted with decisions that, in some cases, carry consequences at the level of national security, made alone, in the dark, with no one watching. That is the actual product the Navy is buying, and it is the reason no amount of technology has made this pipeline obsolete. This is Decoded, the series where we break down the real cost behind the systems everyone else just calls impressive. New episode every Saturday. So the next time someone points at the Navy SEAL pipeline and calls the failure rate a broken system, the honest answer is that it is working exactly as designed. $620,000 is not the price of training one operator. It is the price of a filter precise enough that the people who pass it can be trusted with some of the most consequential decisions in the entire military, under conditions nobody can fully simulate in advance. Every other branch of the military is trying to reduce uncertainty with better sensors, better weapons, and better logistics. This program embraces uncertainty on purpose, because the only way to know who can handle it is to actually put someone inside it and watch what happens when the easiest exit in the entire military, 3 rings of a brass bell, is standing right there the whole time. That is a strange kind of investment by any normal accounting standard, spending more money on the people who fail than on the training itself. But it is also, by every account the Navy has ever given, one of the most cost-effective programs the military runs, because the alternative, sending untested people into the highest-stakes missions in modern warfare, is not a cost anyone is willing to calculate. That is the real economics behind one of the most expensive filters in the entire U.S. military, and it says something bigger about how America has decided to fight going forward. Less about raw numbers of troops, more about small groups of people who can be trusted completely and who cost a fortune to find. If you want the next breakdown like this one, subscribe and drop a comment with the system you want decoded next. This has been BattleTech Declassified, made to listen, no screen required.